These last few weeks have been very different for all of us. So when things are very different, I like to remember things that take me back to a time before. So I'm in one of my favorite places, on my front porch, to read one of my favorite stories, one in a collection by Richard and Judy Dockery Young. It's called Jack and the Sally-Bally. A couple of words you're going to run into. One is the word Ozark, O-Z-A-R-K. That's a range of mountains out in the Midwest. And the other is the word loom, L-O-O-M. A loom is a big wooden contraption where you have threads going one direction and you put threads the other direction. Even though you may not be able to picture that in your mind, all you have to know is a loom is big and it's noisy. Jack and the Sally-Bally, one of my favorite stories. Once upon a time in the wooded hills of the Ozarks, there lived a smart young boy named Jack. He climbed a bean plant. You remember him, Jack and the Beanstalk. And he killed a giant. But now he was visiting his grandma and grandpa in their log cabin in the valley. Up in the hills above Jack's grandma's cabin, there lived a monster that the folks called the Sally-Bally. He would come sallying forth into the valley and scare the people. He'd eat their horses and cows and kick down their log cabins just for meanness. That Sally-Bally was one bad critter. Sometimes he even ate people. Well, it was autumn when Jack came for his visit. Jack's grandpa had a crop of apples in his orchard that were the biggest, reddest, sweetest apples you had ever seen. And the smell of those apples, cooking in the big black pot over an outdoor fire, filled the entire valley. All the neighbors smelled the apples when they were cooking. And so did the Sally-Bally. That old Sally-Bally had come down out of the hills 2 times before, picked up the big black pot from the fire, and drunk the apples like a jug of cider. He would have eaten Jack's grandma and grandpa, too, if they hadn't run and hid for 2 full days. Jack's grandpa needed to pick some more apples to take to town and sell for some cash money. Jack agreed to help him. They took 2 big buckets and went into the orchard to pick. The apples were so good that they ate a few while they were picking. Now the smell of those sweet apples filled the air and woke the Sally-Bally in his cave. "You know," said Grandpa, "we ought to make a Sally-Bally trap and use these apples as bait." Soon they were both bragging about how easily they could catch that old Sally-Bally. They began to laugh and joke about it and forgot to keep watch for the Sally-Bally. Sure enough, over the hill came the Sally-Bally, brought by the smell of the apples. The Sally-Bally was 20 feet tall, with 18 feet of him legs. He had long, ugly hair and ears as big as the bed of a horse-drawn wagon. His arms hung so low they dragged the ground, and his mouth had so many teeth it looked like a laundry basket full of butcher knives. The Sally-Bally roared like a mountain lion arguing with a steam engine. Now Jack and his grandpa began to run toward the house with the Sally-Bally chasing them. Jack threw down his bucket of apples, and the critter just stopped to eat them, bucket and all. When the Sally-Bally had almost caught up to Jack and his grandpa, Grandpa threw down his bucket, and the critter stopped to eat those apples too. While the Sally-Bally was picking his teeth with the bail of the second bucket, Jack and Grandpa ran to the cabin and yelled for Grandma to run and hide. "Run, Grandma!" yelled Jack. "Here comes the Sally-Bally!" And knowing they didn't have enough time to run away, Jack and Grandpa turned over the big black pot in the front yard and hid under it. Knowing that they didn't have enough time to run, they saw Grandma sitting on the front porch, taking in the cool breeze and weaving on her wooden loom. She saw Jack and Grandpa come running. She even saw the Sally-Bally come over the hill and look around for them after they'd hidden under the big black pot. But Grandma was a tough old lady, and she just puffed on her pipe and went on weaving on her loom. The Sally-Bally came dragging over to the cabin, stepped over the black pot without looking under it, and growled at Grandma. "Where those men folks at?" growled the Sally-Bally. "I ain't seen 'em," said Grandma, weaving on her loom. "You better tell me where they're at," said the Sally-Bally, leaning over the roof of the porch and blowing his hot, stinky breath on Grandma, "or I'll smash your porch flat." Now, the porch was Grandma's most favorite place to be. so that threat made her real mad.
"Lean over here real close if you want to hear where they are," she said to Sally-Bally.
So the Sally-Bally leaned way down and put his big old ear that was as big as a horse-drawn wagon near the porch. Quick like a bunny, Grandma jumped inside the Sally-Bally's hairy old ear and pulled her loom and rocking chair in with her. Then she sat back down and went to work, rocking in her chair and weaving on her loom. The noise almost drove the Sally-Bally crazy. The rocking chair squeaked and the weaving loom creaked. The Sally-Bally jumped around in circles, hollering and yelling. He scratched his ear, shook his head, and he rolled on the ground. But Grandma was used to riding in a wagon over the roads in the Ozark Mountains, and this ride in the critter's ears was mild compared. Finally, the Sally-Bally couldn't stand the noise of the rocking chair and the weaving loom any longer. He decided to beat his head against a nearby cliff to see if he couldn't knock Grandma and her furniture out of his ear. He stood beside the cliff and beat his big ugly head on the rock so hard that he fell down dead. By now, Jack and his grandpa had come out from under the black pot and had run to help Grandma. They carried the loom between them, and Grandma carried the rocking chair upside down on her head. The three walked back to the cabin in the valley and cooked a big pot of apples. "Well," said Jack to his grandma, "now that you've killed the Sally-Bally, what are you going to do with him?"
"Ain't going to do nothing," said Grandma. "The moss will grow on him, and the ferns will grow on him, and the weeds will grow on him, and by next spring you won't even know he was ever there."
And you know, she was right. These may seem to be difficult times, but Grandma was true. After a while, after a wait, it'll all be fine again. Thanks for listening to Jack and the Sally-Bally, one of my favorite stories.